You're tuned in to RX Radio.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to RX Radio. At this point, this is just going to be a staple. You guys are going to sit there and listen to me talk about the week that I just had. I'm 100% serious about that, by the way. But we'll get Shallow back on here soon. I got a couple other guests lined up for you. But for today, I want to talk about a conversation that a lot of trainers, coaches have with athletes, and athletes should be having with themselves. You know, intelligent athletes should be having these conversations with themselves if their goal is to truly progress and get better at what they're doing. So I'm going to let you guys into 4 conversations that I had with clients this past week, and we'll pull out kind of some of the underlying things, some of the themes that I find that I commonly have to talk about with them around modulating intensity while training. So that's something I find very helpful in just hearing how other people have these conversations. This is something that it plays more into the mindset, the mentality of the athlete itself, and being able to effectively communicate with the person in front of you. And to do that, you have to be able to leverage their goals and their intention in training, right? And that can be a very touchy subject, a very personal, a very difficult subject, because people feel, especially people that have been doing this for a while and have seen success with what they're doing, they feel very partial to the way that they've done things, right? And that's great, good for them, but there also needs to be some sort of openness to see if they could do things better, or understanding that maybe the reason that they're not meeting their goals or that they're having issues in the training process is actually because of the way that they approach training and their rationale around training. So, like I said, I have 4 clients that I was working with this week that I had individual conversations that are all a bit different, a few of them kind of overlapping in terms of the actual application here, but all completely different in terms of goals, in terms of exercise they're doing, what it looks like, and their intentions around progressing. So we'll talk about those in just a minute here. Before we get into that, I want to say that so level 1 went for sale. Our spring class went for sale this Monday of this week, and we have had the biggest response yet. So we had more people on our wait list for this class than we've ever had before. So first and foremost, I want to say thank you to you guys. We've been doing this a minute now. This is year number 9 that we're on. I'm doing this almost a decade in, and it keeps growing, and that's surreal to me. So I want to say thank you to everyone who has supported us thus far, especially anyone who's listening right now. Thank you for continuing to tune in week over week after all the dumb fucking shit that we say. For those that are in the incoming class, I look forward to working with you, look forward to meeting you, hang out in the labs. And I'm just really grateful for everyone that has made this what it is, because this has caused the most growth in my career more than I ever could have asked for or imagined, because I get to have these sort of conversations with like-minded people that do this at a high level week in and week out. So thank you guys. That being said, if you guys were on the wait list, you should have gotten an email Monday morning with your discount code to get a discount on the level 1 for the upcoming class. Let me pull up the date so I don't fuck this up. Class is starting on May 12th. That may or may not happen. No. We've had times where we've had to modulate the date a little bit, but this is one where we're pretty locked in for that date. So May 12th will be the start date for the next level 1 class. So if you got a discount code, awesome, sick. If not, sorry, it's too late. You have to sign up before course registration opens, and that is in the past now. But it is for sale. The level 1 is for sale right now, starting May 12th. So if you haven't taken it yet, if you're on the fence, now is the time. Hop on in and join the team. See, the more of these that I do where I'm just talking to myself in this empty fucking room, the more I realize I need to chill out and just take a sip of coffee. So that's where we're at. But as promised, the topic for today is modulating intensity in training. So I think this comes in all capacities. The longer that you've been training, the more you've had to have this conversation. But I do think it is a conversation that you have to have with every single person that you're training. And if you are an athlete yourself and you're listening to this, this is a conversation you should be having with yourself. Modulating intensity. And what I mean by that is understanding how much effort is appropriate to give in a given exercise, a given session, a given phase of training. And there's always going to be a point where, let me take a step back. I grew up wrestling in Pennsylvania. People in Pennsylvania, largely retarded, myself included, very retarded. But the kind of the culture around training and wrestling, and I believe it's still this way. I think it's probably progressing a bit in certain areas and pockets, but largely it's about effort, right? It's not necessarily about, refining the way that we do things. And that's not true in terms of the sport itself. Like there are people who get very far in the sport through refining technique and being very good technicians. And that's a little separate from what I'm talking about here, but emphasis on technique in sport specific skills is always going to be kind of top tier. That's something we always want to prioritize. But the rationale around training has always been more is better, harder is better. Like it should be uncomfortable, mental toughness. And I think that will get you very fucking far in whatever it is that you're going to do. If you are mentally tough and you can push through pain and you could do uncomfortable things and you could do them to past the point where you want to stop, then that's something that will carry you very, very, very far in a lot of areas. And that is something that is, I think, a lot of people that have gotten very strong or have seen success in athletics, that's something that is in every single one of those people, right? There's not many people that just kind of skate by. What's the fucking saying? It's like hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. I believe that's 100% true. And that's been legitimately me my entire athletic career, whatever I did, my entire life, whatever I did, whether that's business, whether that's athletics, whether that's strength training, whether that's coaching and training other people. Like it's not something that necessarily came easily to me, but it's something that I gave a shit about and I immersed myself in and I tried as hard as I could to learn as much as I can, and I got better with it. Right? And that's kind of the idea here, is that like, yes, hard work is important and you need to be willing to work hard. But I think it's refining the thinking around what hard work is. That is the conversation that we need to be having with clients and with ourselves and with our own training, right? There's every single person I've ever worked with in terms of any training, in terms of high level athletics, in terms of wrestling, there's no one that's at the top of their game that isn't fucked up, right? And it's kind of the collateral that you have to incur to be competitive in something, in some sort of endeavor, right? It's at a certain point, performance is unhealthy, and for us to continue to pursue performance, we're going to have concessions that we have to make in terms of being healthy, in terms of being pain-free, in terms of, nagging injuries and things that will continue to pop up and probably worsen over time. And a lot of times that's ultimately what takes people out of the game. What ends their career is that they don't tend to these things. And over time, it becomes something they can't ignore. It becomes something that limits progress. It's something that limits performance. And that's when they have to hang up the shoes. So that's kind of where I'm coming from when having these conversations around modulating intensity, that a lot of people, they just think that trying harder is the only way to get better. And there has to be a level of try hard. Yeah, fucking absolutely. But you have to try hard at the right things, right? I think a really good reference for this is like, if you've ever seen Happy Gilmore, which apparently there's a second one coming out, but that was my childhood. Like, in the beginning, sucked at hockey, goes to hockey tryouts for the 30th year in a row, doesn't get drafted. Okay, goes to the batting cage and starts fucking taking balls to the dome at the batting cage. He's trying really hard to get tough, but by getting repetitive concussions, by getting hit with baseballs, that's not going to make you any better at hockey, right? That's what I see from, I don't know, every person I've ever worked with, including myself as an athlete, for some point in their career. They're just fucking taking baseballs to the dome, hoping that it'll make them tougher so that they get drafted next year. And that's not how you want to go about training, right? Trying hard is not just giving more effort into the things that you're already doing. Trying hard is understanding the things that are going to make you more successful and the things that are going to take away from your performance, and putting effort into the things that are going to make you more successful, will not necessarily over distributing that effort into things that make you feel good because it scratches that mental itch of, I tried hard today, or I'm leaving the gym exhausted today, because that's the only thing that constitutes as a productive workout, which is not. That's absolutely not true. So that's the core of these conversations, is that, yeah, we want people to be working hard, but we want them to be working hard at the right things at the right times. And that's more important than, someone that comes into the gym and fucking murders themselves day in, day out. But because of that, maybe they're never recovering, maybe they're not tending to injuries, and maybe they're blunting their overall performance because of how hard they're trying in the gym. And everyone goes through this phase. Like, you see progress as you get into training, you see progress as you get into a new sport, at the point where you're proficient enough in the skills to progress them, but you're not so proficient that your technique will hold up over time. And they just think, all right, I need to do this more. I need more reps, more volume. I need more weight on the bar. And those are the only ways that they understand progression. And it's not necessarily focused around getting better at skills or understanding when they need to recover so that they can push harder at times that are more important, or going to have a larger impact on their training or their overall performance. So that's what I mean when I say modulating intensity. And these are conversations that, again, it's something we have to be having with our clients. And if you don't, then you're going to lose clients, because they're going to think that at the point where they can't add another 5 pounds to the dumbbells they're doing RDLs with, like, oh, they're done progressing with you. They know everything that there is to know, and they're just going to keep going and doing this on their own. Or they're just going to get hurt because they're trying to pursue more and more weight week over week. And that's not the appropriate progression for that. So I'm going to drink some coffee, and I'm going to start to talk about a couple of these conversations that I had this past week. And you guys can pull from those in terms of, all right, like, I have this client, or I've had these conversations before, and I'll just let you know how I've approached those conversations. So just to give you context, a lot of the clients that I work with, I either work with them in terms of increasing performance from the level they're currently at, or I acquire those clients through like an injury that they've had, and then I take them through rehab into performance. So that's where these conversations kind of stem from. The first one is a client that came to me initially for just chiropractic care. Had like an ankle injury, a shoulder injury that was long-standing, high level, like D1 collegiate athlete, had an undiagnosed labral tear, one of the shoulders, like a really bad ankle injury that required surgery earlier in life. She's now like mid-30s, very strong, incredibly strong for her size, very athletic. Kind of bounced back and forth between like old collegiate strength and training programs, got into CrossFit, enjoyed like the competitive nature of it, got hurt doing CrossFit, came to me through that. So worked with her for a while through chiropractic, got her feeling good through passive care, kind of opened the door into active care, and now we've been training together for a while, probably about a year or so. And we've gotten to that point in her training career where again, like I said, she came to me strong. I didn't necessarily make her strong. She was already strong. She just didn't have a very good concept of how to use her body, how to brace her core so that she can use her hips well, how to maintain a stable rib cage so she could use her shoulders well. So we did a lot of kind of front end learning and rehab type work there. And recently what happened is that we went through kind of a shift in her program, moving from more so kind of capacity building and like higher output to more stability and unilateral focus. And in that, one of the movements was a leg press. And like I always put RPE in her program. We've had conversations around it before. But there was a disconnect in kind of the thing that I was saying and the thing that she was hearing here, or the thing that maybe she was hearing it, but she was putting into practice. So went from bilateral leg press to unilateral. Tried to just half the weight that she was using, because she's like, I do X weight bilateral, so I'm going to do Y weight, which is half of that unilateral. And just kind of having that understanding, like, okay, two is twice the amount of one, so I could do twice the amount of weight, right? That's how that works. That's not how that fucking works. And the thing about this is, even if that was how that works, that's not how this works on a given specific day, depending on the variables, especially with a change in program intention, where now we were doing a lot of externally stabilized things to now requiring a lot of lateral hip stability, unilateral hip stability, core stability in the exercises. So, and these are things that we had conversations around, but people only understand this to the capacity that they can implement it, right? It's someone that I don't work with exclusively one-on-one. I write her program. She does it the majority on her own. She'll come in and train with me, maybe once or twice a month. Cool. But in that first week of the program, she tried to go too heavy because she had this understanding of, okay, I did this weight bilateral and leg press. Now I'm going to go unilateral and I'm going to do half that weight. And it was too heavy, and she didn't hurt herself necessarily in that set, but it did overstress areas that she was already coming into that session with a higher level of fatigue. Her hamstrings, her adductors, because we're training those to a different capacity than we were in that last phase of training. So then what happened is she was warming up the next day, just doing like body weight walking lunges, and that adductor and hamstring just spasmed up on her. And she couldn't even go through the session. And that lasted for like 2 weeks. And it really inhibited her training in that time. And the core of this, the reason that this happened, was because, no matter how many times we have the conversation, no matter how many ways I say it, it only matters as much as they are willing to implement it on their own, right? And that's a lapse in communication on my end, or a lapse in follow through on my end, because she still didn't understand that RPE isn't a specific weight. It's a rate of perceived exertion on a given day in a given set in a specific environment. So we went through, she came in, we went through an assessment on it, and it didn't seem like there was any muscle damage there. It was just a lot of muscle guarding, muscle tension, because of higher level fatigues in areas that were lower or like undertrained. So the conversation then became, okay, like, why did this happen? And the root of it is that, there wasn't necessarily an understanding of how to progress from 1 week to the next, from one exercise to the next, or how much effort she should be putting forth. So I'm like, okay, I know how we can solve this. And the way that, my previous attempts to communicate this in the past, clearly they had failed, because she didn't understand how hard she should be trying, or how to modulate effort on a given day, on a given exercise. So we did, I don't have a leg press in my gym. So we did, a warm up to make sure she was feeling good that day. No issues. Great. So I took her into some walking lunges to start. And I kind of explained the idea of, I explained it both ways. RPE is like, maybe we want to be around 7, 8 for this. So 7 or 8 out of 10 in terms of effort. Okay, or 70 to 80% of maximal effort. A little bit abstract, got it. Also explained the inverse of that, reps in reserve. Some people, their mind works better that way. Mine doesn't, but if it does for you, that's great. So 7, 8, like I want you to be able to do 2 to 3 more good reps when we finish this set. I want to call it quits when we have 2 to 3 more reps in the tank. Okay, cool. So I have her do a set body weight, and I said, all right, what RPE was that for you? She said, I don't know. It was easy. I'm like, yeah, you're right. That was very easy. We can't even assign RPE to that. But then I gave her a set, and she's strong. We'll do walking lunges with like 2 75-pound dumbbells. So I gave her a set of 25s. And I'm like, can you assign RPE to that? She's like, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5. I'm like, cool. All right. I gave her a set of 40-pound dumbbells. Had her do another set. Can you assign RPE to that? Maybe 5, 6. Cool. Awesome. And then gave her one more set. I think it was 55s. And she's like, I don't know. It's kind of the same. Like, we'll call it a 6. All right. So what I'm teaching her there is that understanding that the same movement against more load will increase rate of perceived exertion. Great. And I think that's the understanding that most people have. But most people, it starts and it ends there, right? So where this went next is that, okay, now you feel how adding weight to a movement makes it harder. You have a higher rate of exertion, and you feel like you're trying harder with more weight. Now we're going to do the same thing. We did 4 sets total of Bulgarian split squats with a contralateral load. So 1 dumbbell. She just had 2 55s in her hand doing walking lunges. Great. So first set, I'm like, all right, you're strong. Let's start with the 25. I want you to do 10 reps. Same thing. Asked RPE, maybe 4 or 5. Great. Let's go up. I gave her a 40-pound dumbbell. It's like, okay, 10 reps. Great. All right. 5, 6. Great. We go up to a 55. 10 reps, 5, 6. That kind of felt the same. Okay. Now we've gotten to a point where increasing load is not making this harder for her. So what I did is like, okay, now the issue in the past was that the way that you made this harder, the only way that you would progress was grabbing bigger and bigger dumbbells. And like, I don't even know. She's probably done like 100-pound dumbbell contralateral load split squats. That's fucking strong for anyone. I don't care who the fuck you are. Like that's difficult. If I have her, the only way to progress is now grab a 110, a 120, a 130. Like that only goes on for so long. But she's at 55 pounds now with an RPE of 6. So what I did is I told her, this next set, I want you to think of the same thing, of how hard this is. But what we're going to do is we're going to do a 3-second eccentric, a 1-second active pause, and a 2-second concentric on every rep. That's a 6-second rep with no rest at the top. So we're talking at least a minute locked into this set. 55-pound dumbbell, we go through, I count out the tempo, I tell her to slow down when she stops pausing at the bottom. We make it, to the T, holding that tempo. She's struggling to complete the last rep. I told her, I'm like, all right. Well, I asked her, what's the RPE of that set? She's like, that's a 9-10. Like I could do 1 or no more reps. I'm like, all right, cool. You understand now. And then from that point on, that's a common ground that we have now established that, hey, like, I know you can go heavier. I don't want you to go heavier. I want you to slow this down and make this the RPE that's in your sheet, right? I want you to take a 55-pound dumbbell and I want you to make it hurt like a 130-pound dumbbell would in this movement. And that's something that, face to face with the client, there's no escaping that. It's like, no, remember that time. And once they feel this thing, once they feel like you did 2 sets of 10 reps of a Bulgarian split squat with the same exact weight, but one was twice as hard as the one before it. And that's something that's tangible, something that they can remember, that now, okay, the thing is, they're not going to get hurt now in terms of going on their own and doing this, because I don't think anyone's ever gotten hurt with a 50% maximal load with an excruciating tempo, because the absolute load is much lower, right? And the benefit of that is with a lower load and a longer tempo, things are going to break down very slowly, right? It's going to get hard relatively quickly, but as things start to break down in terms of technique, in terms of stability, in terms of output, it's going to happen over the course of, even if it's one rep to the next, it's happening over the course of a painfully slow 6-second rep. As opposed to with a 130, if something goes wrong from one rep to the next and no tempo, that's going wrong really quickly. And that's going wrong in the way of, at best, reactive muscle spasm like she's had in the past, but at worst, a muscle strain, or a ligament sprain, or something that is an actual injury that now we have to account for that in training. So I found that to be a really impactful way to teach her, okay, we can make this harder without adding more weight. So that's one thing. That's one conversation that I've had just this past week, and kind of the whole context around it, around getting someone to understand how to modulate intensity devoid of increasing load, right? It's if the overall goal, and like, I don't even know if I mentioned this, her overall goal isn't anything competitive. It's to be healthy, not have pain from her previous injuries, and just to be strong and functional, right? So there's no need to really increase maximal load. Like, why would I do that if that's not your goal? I'm not going to overexpose you to risk or expose you to, unnecessary collateral on training if that's has nothing to do with you accomplishing your goals. So now I can make you have a really bad time in the gym. You can have a really hard workout, but you're using much less weight, so you'll be able to recover from that a lot faster. There's going to be a lot less collateral in training. And it's something that is much more progressible than just adding another 5 or 10 pounds on a dumbbell week over week. That took longer than I thought, so we might not get through all 4 of these today. This other one, we'll move on to the next one. This is one that was a little bit more intellectual to me, and this is like a little bit higher level training. So my girlfriend, her name is Corey. She is a professional bodybuilder, and I've been kind of giving her my thoughts and perspective on her training over the past year. We went through a building phase together, and she put on a lot of muscle, and she's now on the other side of that, in more of a fat loss phase, kind of pre-prep phase. And we've just been kind of having open conversations around her training through the duration of this, and talking about when things need to change, when things don't need to change, and how she could be most effective and efficient throughout the training process. Because this is really, when we're talking energy balance, when we're talking gaining, the goal is to gain as much muscle with as little collateral of gaining fat as possible. And then on the fat loss phase, it's the exact opposite of that. It's to retain as much muscle as possible, with minimizing the collateral. Retain as much muscle as possible while losing fat at a much faster rate. And the collateral we risk with that is losing both proportionately muscle and fat, right? So basically what I'm getting at is, in her shifting phases of training to building muscle to now losing fat, you guys can argue me on this, and even she has a bit of a different opinion than I do on this. But I'm of the opinion that when you are in a caloric surplus and you're training well, recovering well, you will gain both fat and muscle, right? It's not like just because I train a specific way or I eat specific macros, I'm only going to gain muscle when I train. No, you're in a surplus, so you're gaining everything, right? You're gaining all these things. But the trick in this, and kind of the specificity and the thing that we want to be as accurate as possible with, is gaining as much muscle, maximizing muscle gain, and minimizing fat gain, right? And then now on the other side, I'm also of the opinion that when you're in a caloric deficit, and this, depending on the supplementation regimen of the individual we're talking about, yes, you may be able to retain more muscle for longer, but regardless of what's going on there, you're going to lose not just fat, you're going to lose muscle and in extreme cases, bone density as well. So as someone who is competing in bodybuilding at a very high level, the goal is to retain all of the benefits of that muscle gaining phase throughout the fat loss phase, is so that essentially we're maximizing fat loss and minimizing the amount of muscle loss as collateral from being in a caloric deficit from high levels of exertion. So the way that she's been organizing training, and I'm very much of the perspective that if nothing needs to change, we will change nothing. But when something needs to change, we need to figure out exactly what that is, and we need to act quickly, and we need to make an accurate assessment so that we can change the thing that needs to change. And in her training lately, we did decrease overall intensity. She's training at a relatively high intensity compared to what she has in the past. Because if you want big muscles, you're going to have to move big weights. Just my opinion. But training 4 to 5 days a week, so maybe even a little bit, probably a lower frequency than a lot of people that are in the competitive bodybuilding realm, but being incredibly efficient and effective in those training sessions. And then on top of that, in her fat loss phase, she started doing about 6 days of cardio per week to kind of get the ball rolling. And then the idea was create a caloric deficit, use the cardio to kind of push that a bit further, and then with training, try and maintain and retain as much muscle as possible, which was going great for a bit until it wasn't. And the thing is, with being in a caloric deficit, there's just less available energy for all of this activity, right? We're not consuming as much energy for this activity, which is exactly what you want to do. Like if there's available glucose in the bloodstream, your body's going to pull from that first to start to break that down and convert into ATP for energy for muscle contractions. Cool. But with all of this activity and lower available energy, there is going to be an effect on performance. You can't be in a caloric deficit and not just maintain the level of weight training and then add in a higher level of cardio than what you're doing and expect to perform the same all the way around, right? You have to have expectations that performance is going to drop, but it needs to stay within a reasonable realm. And then even further than that, the outside of training, the available amount of energy that you have or mental capacity you have, that's eventually going to suffer as well. So there needs to be some sort of level in all of this that you're monitoring, and that's a very subjective way to look at this. But are you able to complete the things that you need to do throughout the day, just in terms of day-to-day function? But aside from that, like in the gym, is your cardio and your caloric deficit making your weight training session suffer to the point where you're no longer being productive there, or you're actually being counterproductive there, and you're making the situation worse because now you're not recovering in between sessions, you have lower energy. So yes, you're burning a lot of calories, you're losing weight doing this, but is some of that coming from muscular breakdown without muscular repair? So, and that's all context. I'm not saying that's her specific situation, but that's like the idea and the thought process that went around this conversation. So the actual situation, she's doing cardio. She does it at a relatively high heart rate, like 150, 160. And she was noticing that she was getting frustrated in her training sessions because performance was dropping off in the amount of load she was able to use, the rep ranges she was able to hit, and even just having the motivation to do specific movements or get through an entire session. So that's a problem in my mind, is that yes, we're losing and the goal is to lose, but also the goal is to retain as much muscle through this. And if we're spending all of our energy doing cardio and recovering from that, we're unable to recover from the training sessions. We're actually having a lower intensity in the training sessions at a relatively low to moderate frequency. Then we're not being as productive in the muscle retention side of this. And that loss is coming from overall caloric burn, not necessarily fat burn, right? So that's a conversation that we then started to have just this past week. Well, it kind of started a little bit further ahead of that, but kind of really opened it up this past week, is that, okay, let's take a look at what's going on here. Like if you're losing weight, yes, the caloric deficit is necessary, right? We need to have you in some level of a caloric deficit for this to continue to be successful. Understood. That's something that can't budge. Now, the variables that we have outside of that, they're going to be, the composition of her macro breakdown is fantastic in my opinion. There's a surplus of protein because, again, in a caloric deficit, what we want to prevent is muscle breakdown for energy, right? Which is very probable if you have high levels of exertion in multiple ways and you don't have the capacity to repair that through protein breakdown amino acids. So she's eating a surplus of protein, very, very modest carbs and fat. That's where she's creating a lot of that deficit from. So a lot of that is to encourage muscle retention and fat loss. Great, fantastic. She's got that dialed. She's got that dialed better than I can explain. But so the variables we looked at were more so around training, right? Because everything outside, it's kind of fixed. Stress management are things we've equated for in the past and continue to do so. Day-to-day responsibilities, they are what they are. It's, we're fucking adults. Life gets stressful. You deal with it, you manage it, but you get done what you have to get done. Especially like her. She runs a business and she's fucking busy. So that is what it is. So what it came down to is looking at her training under a microscope and seeing how we can modify things to make this most efficient. One of those things came down to nutrition timing. Timing her meals around her training sessions a bit better so she had more available energy from the food that she was eating as opposed to, breaking down muscle or body tissue. But the big thing we honed in on to try and make a change here was how she was approaching cardio. Because the big thing is that as her cardio started to increase and that became more consistent, that's the thing that started to creep on her and wear on her, and she associated the fatigue from that as a detriment to performance. So we kind of dove in and looked at a lot of research and information around, how can we be most effective at utilizing cardio to burn fat specifically, right? Because as she's going through these cardio sessions, if she's doing her cardio at a higher heart rate, and this is something you'll see, is that there's research to support that a higher intensity throughout your cardiovascular exercise is going to burn more calories, period. But, and I don't really know what the fuck zone 2 cardio is, but I think this is what people mean when they say it. A heart rate probably around 60 to 70%, and maybe even a little bit closer to 80% of your max heart rate for a well-trained individual. That is going to target more stored fat. That's going to mobilize fat breakdown in your body for available energy, right? And the difference there is that, say we're going for just absolute calorie burn, right? And we don't care where it's coming from. Then there's going to be more collateral in terms of muscle breakdown to get those calories if we don't have that caloric surplus, right? So we're using not just fat, but also, yes, of course, we're using glycogen, we're using oxygen, but then we're pulling from not just fat, but also muscle tissue in that caloric deficit to create energy. So the conversation then became, is it better to burn more calories, or is it better to be more specific to burn more fat? And where we ended up going with this was towards the idea that more calories may not be better if it's non-specific. If we can be slightly more specific to burning fat, then that may help you in the overall goal. That will help you in the overall goal. And the thing about that is what the research says is that to be more specific in burning fat, you actually need to be doing your cardio at a lower heart rate, right? So maybe we're burning less overall calories in that cardio session, but we're being more specific to a higher percentage of those calories coming from fat. So doing it at a heart rate of maybe 120 to 140 with that, yes, the overall caloric expenditure is lower, but that might actually be a benefit, is that now we have more energy available. There's going to be less collateral in terms of muscle breakdown in that cardio session. You're being more specific to burning fat in that, which is the original intention of doing cardio in this way. And now it's also going to be lower effort so that it will be easier to recover from that session, so that you can take that into your weight training session later in the day and you'll have more available energy. You can have a higher level of performance because of that, and you might actually make up that caloric burn on the tail end in your weight training session because now performance is higher than it was when you were killing yourself in cardio. So that's kind of where we ended up with this, and we're end of week 1 into this phase, and this is a bit anecdotal at this point, but all the markers are trending in the right direction, and workouts are going better than they were 2 weeks ago when she was over fatigued, or when she had a higher level of fatigue from doing her cardio at a higher heart rate. So I know these are two very kind of different depictions of modulating intensity in working out, but the commonality between these two is that there is a high level of effort. There's a very high level of effort in both of these scenarios. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to reassign that high level of effort to a more accurate area where we can have improvement closer to someone's goals, or we can make it more efficient in what they're doing at maybe even a lower level of effort. And that's why it's kind of confusing to say this, is that yes, trying hard is going to get you really far, but sometimes trying hard is not physically the act of trying hard in your cardio in a session. Maybe the trying hard is taking a step back and challenging your belief system, and that takes a lot of effort to do. Is that to say, you know what, I'm going to try this a different way than what I've done in the past, or what's worked really well for me in the past, and see if I can get better results. It's hard to take that leap of faith and to put that trust into a process that isn't as well defined for you, or is a little bit more speculative. But that's how we get better at this stuff. If we keep doing the same thing we've always been doing, then yes, we can have results. But I'm very firm in the belief that there's always a better way to do something than what I know how to do. I know the best way that I know how to do it, but like I said, I'm fucking retarded. I said it at the beginning. I said it in the middle. I'll say it at the end. I've learned a lot of ways to do this stuff really well, but there's always going to be better ways. And this is, just as much as these clients are learning, or Corey's learning from this, learning doesn't always necessarily connotate that it's going to be a positive outcome, right? We could learn a way to not do this, and she could be really pissed at me for, bring this up because the results may be worse, but I don't think they will be, right? And that's where this comes from. It's not just, trying things just to try things. It's having a really well thought out, educated opinion on it, and really justifying not just why you should do this, but also justifying why you shouldn't do this. And whichever one of those justifications is a stronger justification, then that's the one that we're going to go with, right? It doesn't necessarily need to be the fact that, I can build a strong argument for doing this. It's also that it's a stronger argument that I have for doing it than it is against doing it, right? And that's the part of this you don't want to miss. Like, yes, I can build an argument. I'm I'm not gonna say what the fuck just went through my head, but I've known a lot of people to go through a Smolov squat program, like a Russian squat program in Olympic weightlifting, in just strength training in general. And if you go through a Smolov squat program, you will see progress. You will get stronger. But there is a ticking time bomb. First off, if you can make it through, but then say you make it through, you saw really good results from that. You know, maybe 6 months later, you're having like a slow in training progress, and you try it again. Okay, there's a very accelerated ticking time bomb of when your knees are going to hurt, your low back's going to give out, you're going to fuck something up, because it's not just trying hard and doing the thing that you know has worked in the past. It's learning from that thing that you've done in the past, understanding the situation that you're in, evolving, making that rationale for, okay, this is why this worked then, but also trying to understand what's going to work now and how that might look different from what's worked in the past. And that's how you continue to evolve in this, and you continue to get better in this. I'm only going to go through one more of these. And this is a really important one to me, because I don't know. I think this exists in both of those, and this third situation. They're all situations where people are trying too hard. They're trying too hard at I don't want to say the wrong things, but at things that may not be the most effective, right? This may not be the case. And I'm sure a lot of times and I've had these clients before where you have to get people to try harder, and that's a different conversation. But I find myself having these conversations honestly more than I do of the conversations around getting people to try harder in what they do. So, and these are very pertinent on my mind. So that's why we're approaching it from this angle. Maybe in the future we'll talk about getting people to try harder. The thing that I do is I say, try harder, and sometimes it works. Or you just call them a pussy. But anyways, this third situation is a little bit different. But again, similar rationale in what we're getting at in terms of what is the way in which you need to try hard to have progress. And it might not be adding load or actually trying harder in the session. It might be pulling back on load and focusing on something that's more difficult to you to execute on than adding load to the bar, if that makes sense. So I've been coaching Olympic weightlifting for over a decade now. I've coached every type of athlete. And the one I see very often, very, very fucking often, is the type that loves to max out. They love to go heavy. And what that means to them is, very predetermined in their head, is I'm going to go up and I'm going to lift my warm-up weights. And then they probably have a weight in their head that they struggle with, or that they always fail at, or like they're trying to make the leap to the next PR. And they go and they lift until they get close to that. And then they miss 100 times and they say, fuck it. And then they leave. Cool. Equally retarded as me. It's common. It's super common. I think that, I think a lot of people approach weightlifting in that way, as that, like, okay, if I want to get stronger quads, I'm going to go to the seated leg extension, and I'm going to do more weight and more reps over time. And every week I'm going to do a little bit more until I have stronger quads, bigger quads. Sick. All right. That applies in that situation for a specific reason, right? There's not much skill. There's, it's a very linear movement. It doesn't take any real skill or stability or understanding how to do that. So if you continue to extend your knee, you're probably going to get better at extending your knee. But there's a coordination, there's a timing, there's a rhythmic aspect of snatching, and a lot of that. There's it's very proprioceptive, and that doesn't even take into account the mental side of things, the confidence that you need, the warding off the self-doubt, the things that come with, putting your body under a relatively heavy barbell. Like, there's a lot of aspects to this that cause people to miss at weights that might not even be a heavy barbell for them. I've worked with plenty of people who are plenty fucking strong, but they can't snatch, 60 kilos, even though they deadlift 600 pounds, whatever that fuck that is in kilos, because we snatch in kilos and deadlift in pounds. Anyways, so the way that I'll program, it's very open to interpretation. But the interpretation is not to the athlete, it's to me. It's for me to interpret how they're moving on that day and give them direction in terms of the stimulus that I think is appropriate for them, and by the way that they're moving, how much they should be lifting on that given day. So this is on a particular day where I had, in the program, I write things kind of vague, but I also give qualifiers. It's work up to a heavy set of, I believe this was a clean and 2 jerks. And the athlete's been lifting probably 4 or 5 years now, a long time. Like, it's pretty well versed in this, but kind of stuck on that mindset of, oh, is this a max out? Like, no. You're going to work up to a heavy single with good technique. And that's the qualifiers, that with good technique, right? So that means that, here's Corey. She's walking in now. I finished talking about her though. So that means the qualifier is that I want you to work up to a heavy set of 1 clean and 2 jerks with good technique. That is the qualifier. If it's not good technique, you have failed. Even if you make the lift, you've failed. You've missed the goal here. We're not training good training anymore. We're not practicing good practice. We're just doing CrossFit now. Not what we want to do. But what I'm getting at with this is that it's this mindset around, do I go up to the most that I can do? And it's in having this conversation, I realized that she didn't have an understanding of, oh, like just because it's the most I can do doesn't mean that it's good, right? And yes, in a competition setting, lifting more weight than the other person is good. But in a training setting, doing better in training is good, right? So working up to a heavy single with good technique is different than working up to a maximal single, right? I don't care how much weight you've lifted in the past. I care how much weight you can lift well right now. And that's the conversation that I ended up having, is that what does that look like versus what do you think that looks like? And she thought that looked like going up until she missed, which is not what we want to do. And there's a fucking retarded weightlifting coach in my area, and I'll keep his name to myself. And there's probably only one person right now that knows who I'm talking about, and she's in the kitchen. But this guy's fucking retarded. And I got into an arguing match with him on the internet once because I said that you should not be missing lifts in training. And I believe that, because if you're training, yes, there's going to be, that's not an absolute statement, and there are going to be missed lifts, but the goal should be that you're training technical consistency across all loads in training. And you cannot do that if you miss, because if you miss, inherently it's inconsistent with a make, right? And you're moving in a way that is not consistent enough for you to train those mechanics in a scalable way. Okay. So if we're missing in training, what we're doing is we're getting better at being inconsistent. And that's not what we want to do. That's fucking retarded. So I have a true belief that you should not be missing lifts in training, especially when it comes to a skilled lift, like a high skill movement. Powerlifters don't fucking miss lifts in training, right? And that's much lower skill than a snatch or a clean and jerk. So that's the idea that I'm getting at, is that as we're training, trying hard, maximal effort in training is exercising restraint in a situation where it's much easier to add load to the bar and have fun and max out and see if we can lift the lift that we've never lifted before. But guess what you're going to get better at doing? If, God bless his heart. Will, there's no way you're listening to this, but I've been working with this one lifter for years, and he comes in, he does CrossFit, he'll do like bodybuilding, he'll come in, do weightlifting for periods of time. And every time he comes in the room, he'll try and snatch 100 kilos. And he's been doing this for probably, 3 years now, and he's never done it. And that doesn't surprise me, because every time you come in and you try to lift 100 kilos and you don't, you're practicing getting better at not lifting 100 kilos. So this dude's good as fuck at not lifting 100 kilos, which is a lot easier to do than the hard thing of practicing restraint, getting really good at snatching 18 kilos and maybe getting your squat up a bit and doing pause snatch pulls and really understanding the positions and snatch balance and things like that for probably not that long, probably 6 weeks, which might be really hard to commit to. But that's the hard thing to do, is to not load up 100 kilos and max out and keep missing. The hard thing to do is to do the training to get better at the qualities that are going to make you better and get better at snatching 80 kilos. And once you're really good at that, get better at snatching 85 kilos. Once you're better at that, 90, 95. And then by the time you do that, 100 should be a formality. Like it should be something that, yeah, I deserve to lift this weight because I've done the training to be able to lift this weight, versus not doing the training, not deserving to, and then being surprised when you don't. So sorry I picked on you there, Will, but you know I love you, and I would say this to your face, and I will, and I have probably. But that's a lot of the message that I wanted to convey around just the mindset around modulating training. And we only got to 3 of the conversations that I've had this past week, but all of those, even though they look very different on paper, there's a commonality there, right? And the commonality is that it's not necessarily just about trying hard, right? It's not about doing more weight, getting a higher heart rate, or loading up the weight that you've been waiting to hit. It's actually about assigning that effort in a more accurate way to the things that are going to make a more impactful change. And sometimes that's not very evident. I don't fault anyone for not knowing what that is. Sometimes it has to be a trial and error, and sometimes you'll get it wrong. But that's the learning process that training is, and that's how speaking with coaches, talking to other people about this, and understanding more and continual learning will help you accomplish these goals faster, because then you're assigning your effort in the right place, right? And it's, like I said in the beginning, like it's trying hard, training hard, working hard, being able to invest effort when you don't want to. That is a quality that is a prerequisite to being successful in any of these things. You have to have that. But that's a very raw, unfiltered version of that quality. And if you can refine that down to not just working hard, but working hard at the things that are going to be most effective at getting you to accomplish your goals, that's when you're going to see the most success. I'm done. Thanks for listening, guys. I appreciate you tuning in. Hopefully you found this helpful. If you guys are interested in the level 1, like I said, it's up for sale right now. If you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out to me or send us an email at info@pre-grip.com. But we'll talk to you next week.